Imagine you are sitting in a room. The room is comfortable. The lighting is warm. There is a television on the wall, and it is telling you about the world. It is telling you who the heroes are and who the villains are. It is telling you what to be afraid of and what to feel grateful for. It is telling you what a decent, sensible, reasonable person believes. And you are nodding. Because it all sounds right. It all sounds like the truth. It sounds, in fact, exactly like what you already thought. Now here is the question nobody asks. What if the room was designed? What if the lighting was chosen deliberately? What if the television was not showing you the world, but showing you a version of the world, crafted with scientific precision, tested on human psychology, refined over 100 years of trial and error, for the specific purpose of making you feel exactly what you are feeling right now? Informed, aware, in control of your own mind. What if the greatest trick ever pulled on the human race was not making people believe a lie, but making people believe they had never been lied to? Here is a number. $17 billion. That is the amount the United States government alone spent on public relations, communications, and media management in a single year, according to a study by researchers at George Washington University. $17 billion. Spent not on roads, not on schools, not on hospitals. Spent on shaping what you think. And that is just the budget they admitted to. Here is another number, 1. That is the number of times in your entire school education that you were probably taught how propaganda actually works at a neurological level, how it rewires the brain, how it exploits the exact cognitive shortcuts your mind uses every single day just to function, how it does not target the weak or the uneducated, but specifically, deliberately, with surgical precision targets people who believe they are too smart to be fooled. 1 time, if that, and here is the number that should disturb you most, 0. That is how many people throughout history who were successfully propagandized ever felt like they were being propagandized. The Germans who supported the Nazi regime in the 1930s did not feel manipulated. They felt informed. They felt awake. They felt like they had finally seen through the lies to the truth underneath. The Americans who cheered for every war their government launched felt not like sheep being herded, but like patriots, making a righteous, rational, free choice. 0 people in all of recorded history ever felt it happening, which means the feeling of being immune to it is not evidence that you are immune to it. It is the primary symptom of exposure. My name does not matter. What matters is the next hour. Because in the next hour, I'm going to show you something that cannot be unseen. I am going to show you the machinery, the actual psychological engineering behind how modern propaganda works. The documented, peer-reviewed, Nobel Prize-winning science of how a belief that is completely false becomes something you will argue for, fight for, and in some cases die for, while being absolutely certain it was your own idea. I'm going to show you the names of the people who built this system, the books they wrote about it openly, proudly, because they never imagined you would read them, the experiments that proved it works, the moments in history where it worked so completely that entire civilizations walked into catastrophe while cheering. And I'm going to show you something that almost no one who covers this topic ever shows you. I'm going to show you how it is working on you right now, not in a government somewhere else, not on people less educated than you, on you in this moment, through the very channels, the very habits of mind, the very feelings of certainty that you currently trust the most. If that makes you want to click away, I understand. That reaction is also part of the design. But if you stay, by the end of this, you will understand something about your own mind that most people spend their entire lives never confronting. And understanding it, even partially, even imperfectly, is the only defense that has ever existed against it. So let us begin at the very beginning, with a man you have never heard of, who reshaped the entire modern world, and who wrote down exactly how he did it in a book that almost nobody reads. There is a man you have never heard of who changed the course of history, more than almost any politician, general, or scientist of the 20th century. He never led an army. He never held public office. He never invented anything you can touch or see. What he invented was something far more powerful than any weapon. He invented the science of making you believe things that are not true while being completely certain that you figured it out yourself. His name was Edward Bernays, and the story of what he built, why he built it, and what it did to the world you are living in right now is one of the darkest and most important stories never told in a classroom. But Bernays is just the beginning, because what he started was taken by governments, corporations, intelligence agencies, and media empires and refined into something so sophisticated, so pervasive, and so invisible that most people who are affected by it most deeply are the ones who are most certain they are immune to it. That certainty, that feeling of being too smart to be fooled, is not protection. It is the propaganda working exactly as designed. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you are going to understand something about your own mind that most people spend their entire lives never confronting. And it is going to be uncomfortable, and it is going to be true. Let us start with something that will immediately challenge you. Let us start with the most dangerous lie about propaganda. The most dangerous lie about propaganda is that it is something that happens to other people, to less educated people, to people in authoritarian countries with state-controlled media, to people who are less intelligent, less critical, less sophisticated than you. This is not just wrong. This is itself one of the most effective pieces of propaganda ever deployed on educated Western populations. Here is the truth that the researchers know and almost nobody talks about. In 1951, a psychologist named Solomon Asch conducted what became one of the most replicated experiments in the history of social psychology. He brought groups of people into a room and showed them lines on a card. 1 line on the left, 3 lines on the right. The task was simple. Which line on the right matches the length of the line on the left? The answer was visually obvious. A child could see it. And yet, when the other people in the room, who were secretly actors working for Asch, unanimously gave the wrong answer, 37% of participants gave the wrong answer too. Not because they could not see the correct answer, but because the social pressure of unanimous disagreement was psychologically more powerful than the evidence of their own eyes. 37% of people under mild social pressure, in a low-stakes experiment with no punishment for disagreement, denied what they could literally see with their own eyes. Now scale that up. Not a room with 6 actors, an entire media ecosystem, an entire culture, an entire educational system, an entire social environment, where certain ideas are treated as obviously correct and other ideas are treated as the province of lunatics and conspiracy theorists. What percentage of people deny what they can see then? The research of Robert Cialdini, documented in Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, shows that social proof is one of the most powerful forces in human behavior. When we are uncertain, we look to what everyone else believes. And when everyone around us seems to believe something, we feel the pull to believe it too, powerfully, viscerally, in a way that feels not like social pressure, but like coming to a rational conclusion. This is not a flaw in stupid people. This is how all human brains work, including yours, including mine. The researchers are not exempt. The experts are not exempt. The psychologists who study propaganda are not exempt. And the people who design propaganda know this better than anyone. Now let us go back to Edward Bernays, because his story is not just historically interesting, it is the blueprint for everything that followed. Bernays was born in Vienna in 1891. His mother was Freud's sister. His father's sister was Freud's wife. He was literally the nephew of the man who mapped the unconscious mind. And from a very young age, he understood something that most people still do not understand a century later. Rational argument is almost never the primary driver of human belief. Emotion is identity is fear and desire and tribal belonging are. Rational argument is almost always constructed after the fact to justify a belief, That was formed emotionally. Bernays first tested this understanding during World War I. He worked for the Committee on Public Information, the American government's wartime propaganda bureau, whose job was to transform a deeply isolationist American public, a public that had voted for Woodrow Wilson partly because he kept them out of the war, into an enthusiastic supporter of military intervention in Europe. They succeeded brilliantly, and Bernays spent the rest of his life thinking about exactly how they had done it and how the techniques could be refined and applied in peacetime. In 1928, he published the book that laid out his entire philosophy. He called it Propaganda. And the fact that this book is almost never discussed in schools or mainstream media, despite being one of the most consequential books of the 20th century, is itself deeply revealing. In this book, Bernays wrote, and this is one of the most chilling passages in modern literature. He wrote that the intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. He argued that because the masses were fundamentally irrational, they needed to be guided by an invisible government of enlightened elites who understood how to shape public opinion for the greater good. He was not hiding this. He was proud of it. He genuinely believed that democracy only functioned because there were people like him quietly managing what the public believed. And here is the part that should make your blood run cold. He put these techniques to immediate commercial and political use. He was hired by the tobacco industry in the 1920s to solve a serious problem. Women were not smoking cigarettes. This was cutting the potential market in half. The reason women were not smoking was a deep cultural taboo. Smoking in public was considered unfeminine, even scandalous. Bernays needed to break that taboo. And the way he broke it is a masterclass in psychological manipulation. He hired a group of debutantes, wealthy young women from prominent families, to march in the 1929 New York Easter Parade while publicly smoking cigarettes. He told them to call their cigarettes torches of freedom. He had prearranged for photographers to be present. He had prearranged for the story to be carried in newspapers across the country, framed not as an advertisement but as a news story about a feminist protest. Women lighting up in public as an act of liberation, as a blow against male oppression, as a symbol of equality and independence. Within years, female smoking rates skyrocketed. Women had been manipulated into damaging their own health by a campaign specifically designed to attach a deadly product to the most powerful desire a human being can have: the desire for dignity, for equality, for freedom. This is propaganda at its most elegant and most evil. It does not tell you what to do. It makes you feel that doing the harmful thing is your own free choice, your own act of rebellion, your own expression of who you are. Now, let us talk about the dark truth of how propaganda actually rewires the human brain. Not metaphorically, literally. In 2018, a team of neuroscientists at University College London published research in the journal Nature Neuroscience that documented something extraordinary. They used brain scanning technology to observe what happens in the human brain when a person is repeatedly exposed to false information. What they found was that repetition of a false statement activates the same neural pathways as repetition of a true statement. The brain does not have a separate processing system for facts and for lies. It processes both through the same mechanisms. And the more any statement is processed, whether true or false, the stronger the neural pathway associated with that statement becomes. This is why the most fundamental technique of propaganda, the one used by every propagandist from the ancient Egyptians to modern social media algorithms, is simply repetition. You do not need to be logically persuasive. You do not need evidence. You do not need sophisticated argument. You need volume and repetition. Hitler's propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, understood this intuitively, decades before the neuroscience confirmed it. He kept meticulous diaries throughout the Nazi period, and in those diaries, later published as the Goebbels Diaries and analyzed extensively in Victor Klemper's The Language of the Third Reich, he returned again and again to the same principle. He believed that if you repeated a lie often enough and loudly enough and in enough contexts, simultaneously, it would become the psychological equivalent of truth for the average person. He called this the big lie, a term he actually borrowed from Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf, where Hitler described the technique in almost clinical terms. The idea was that ordinary people tell small lies but feel guilty about large ones, and therefore ordinary people assume that a lie of enormous magnitude must be true because no one could possibly be brazen enough to construct something so large and so false. This is one of the darkest insights in the psychology of propaganda. The bigger the lie, the more believable it becomes, because the scale of the deception is itself a form of evidence for its authenticity. We are watching this principle operate in real time every day. But because it is happening at scale, because it is happening through channels we trust, because it is happening in our language and our cultural context, we almost never see it. Let us talk about something that the mainstream media will almost never discuss. Let us talk about Operation Mockingbird. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is documented history. It was confirmed in 1975 by the United States Senate's Church Committee, a formal congressional investigation into the activities of American intelligence agencies. The documents are declassified. The testimony is on record. Operation Mockingbird was a program run by the Central Intelligence Agency beginning in the late 1940s and continuing through at least the 1970s. The program involved the CIA secretly paying journalists, editors, and media executives at major American and international news outlets to publish stories that serve the agency's propaganda interests. The scale of this program was staggering. At its height, the CIA had assets, meaning people on its payroll or under its influence, at over 400 news organizations worldwide. This included major American newspapers, wire services, radio networks, and television broadcasters. The journalists involved were not always aware they were being used. Sometimes they were. Sometimes they were simply given information that was carefully curated to tell the story the agency wanted told, framed as exclusive intelligence-based reporting. Carl Bernstein, the journalist who, along with Bob Woodward, broke the Watergate story, published a landmark investigation in Rolling Stone magazine in 1977 titled The CIA and the Media. In this piece, based on his review of CIA documents and interviews with current and former intelligence officials, Bernstein documented in detail how this program operated and how deeply it had penetrated American journalism. He wrote that the CIA's use of the American news media had been so systematic and so extensive that the agency had literally changed the face of American journalism. Now here is the part that should disturb you most. Operation Mockingbird was ended, or at least officially ended, in 1976 following the Church Committee's exposure. But the question that should keep you up at night is this. If you operated a program that successfully embedded intelligence assets inside major media organizations for 30 years, and then you officially terminated that program, would you actually stop? Or would you simply stop writing it down? And beyond the specific question of the CIA, the deeper question is this. In a world where major media organizations are owned by a handful of enormous corporations, where those corporations have deep financial relationships with governments and military contractors, where editors and executives move fluidly between media, government, and corporate roles, does there need to be a formal program called Operation Mockingbird for the effect of Operation Mockingbird to continue? Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman's propaganda model, which we discussed in the previous video, says no. The filtering happens structurally. It happens through ownership, through advertising dependence, through sourcing relationships. No CIA agent needs to make a phone call. The system produces the desired output automatically. Now let us go deeper into the psychology. Because understanding the mechanisms of propaganda, the actual psychological levers being pulled, is the key to understanding why it works on everyone. The first mechanism is what psychologists call the illusory truth effect. We touched on this in the last video, but here we need to go deeper because it is the foundation of everything. In 1977, researchers Hesher Goldstein and Topino published their landmark study showing that familiarity produces the feeling of truth. But the more recent research, particularly a 2015 study by Lisa Fazio and colleagues at Vanderbilt University published in the Journal of Experimental Psychology, revealed something even more disturbing. They found that the illusory truth effect works even when people already know the correct answer. Read that again. Even when participants knew that a statement was false, repeated exposure to that statement increased their tendency to rate it as true. The repetition was more powerful than the existing correct knowledge. This means that if you know something is false and you are repeatedly exposed to it anyway, your confidence in its falseness erodes over time. This is not theory. This is experimental data. Your brain is not a storage device that holds facts securely. It is a dynamic living system that continuously recalibrates what feels true based on what it has been most recently and most repeatedly exposed to. This is why every authoritarian government in history has invested so heavily in controlling not just what people are told, but what they are told repeatedly, what they hear in school, what they see on television, what they read in newspapers, what they absorb through cultural products like films and novels and songs. The goal is not a single convincing argument. The goal is an environment of total repetition. The second mechanism is emotional bypassing. Daniel Kahneman, in Thinking Fast and Slow, described the human mind as operating through two systems. System 1 is fast, automatic, and emotional. System 2 is slow, deliberate, and rational. Most of our daily mental processing happens through System 1, and System 1 is almost completely vulnerable to propaganda. Propaganda is designed to speak directly to System 1. It uses images rather than arguments because images are processed emotionally and instantaneously. It uses music because music bypasses rational evaluation and creates emotional states that become associated with whatever message accompanies them. It uses simple slogans rather than complex analysis because slogans can be processed without triggering critical thought. Think about political advertising. In the modern era, a political advertisement might be 30 seconds long. In that 30 seconds, there is almost no propositional content. There are images of families and children and sunlit fields paired with a warm, reassuring voice. Or there are dark images, minor key music, and a frightening voice describing the dangers posed by the opponent. Neither advertisement contains a single logical argument. Both are pure emotional programming, and research by psychologist Drew Weston, published in his book The Political Brain, The Role of Emotion in Deciding the Fate of the Nation, shows that these emotional advertisements are dramatically more effective at changing political preferences than rational policy arguments, because the part of the brain that political propaganda targets is not the part that evaluates arguments. It is the part that registers feelings. The third mechanism, and this one is the darkest, is identity fusion. Here's something that almost no one tells you about propaganda. The most effective propaganda does not try to give you new beliefs. It tries to fuse existing beliefs with your sense of who you are. Once a belief becomes part of your identity, it becomes almost impossible to change, because changing the belief now feels like destroying yourself. This is documented extensively in the work of psychologist William Swan at the University of Texas, whose research on self-verification theory shows that people will go to extraordinary lengths, including accepting evidence of their own suffering, to maintain a consistent sense of identity. When propaganda successfully attaches a political position to your identity, when believing the right things becomes part of what it means to be a good person of your particular group, then challenging that position no longer feels like an intellectual exercise. It feels like an attack on who you are. And the emotional response to such an attack is not curiosity. It is rage. This is why political arguments so rarely change minds. Not because people have evaluated the evidence and found the other side wanting, But because the belief is not stored in the part of the brain where evidence lives, it is stored in the part of the brain where identity lives. And evidence does not reach identity. Identity only changes through emotional experiences, through relationships, through profound disruptions to the sense of self. The propagandist, who understands identity fusion, does not try to give people new information. They try to make their message feel like an expression of who the listener already is. Now, I want to tell you about something that will genuinely disturb you. Something that most media commentary on propaganda never touches. I want to talk about what researchers call the backfire effect. Brendan Nyhan and Jason Riefler, political scientists at Dartmouth and Georgia State University, published research in 2010 that documented a phenomenon so counterintuitive that it shook the foundations of how people thought about political communication. They found that when people with strong political beliefs were presented with factual corrections to misinformation, they believed the corrections did not change their minds. Instead, in many cases, the corrections made them believe the original misinformation more strongly. Correcting a false belief did not reduce confidence in that belief. It increased it. This became known as the backfire effect, and it is one of the most unsettling findings in all of political psychology. The mechanism is this. When your identity is fused with a belief, a factual challenge to that belief is processed not as information, to be evaluated, but as a threat to be defended against. The brain mobilizes its defenses. It searches for counter-arguments, for reasons to dismiss the challenge, for ways to reframe the correcting information as itself part of the deception. And in the process of doing all this defensive work, the original belief gets rehearsed and strengthened. This is why propaganda, once successfully embedded in a population, is extraordinarily difficult to dislodge through fact-checking. The fact-checking itself becomes part of the propaganda environment. The corrections become evidence of the conspiracy to suppress the truth. The experts become evidence of elite manipulation. And here is the critical implication that almost nobody draws clearly. If corrections can strengthen false beliefs, then the standard liberal democratic assumption that an informed public with access to accurate information will naturally arrive at correct conclusions is not just optimistic. It is, in certain conditions, precisely wrong. This does not mean truth is irrelevant, but it means that truth communicated through the wrong channels, framed in the wrong way, delivered by the wrong messengers, can actively deepen the problem it is trying to solve. The propagandist who understands the backfire effect does not fear fact-checkers. They welcome them. Every fact-check directed at their audience strengthens the bond between that audience and the original message. Let us talk about a specific and deeply disturbing case study. Let us talk about how a society of educated, culturally sophisticated people was turned into enthusiastic supporters of one of the most violent regimes in human history in less than 5 years. Germany in the early 1920s was not a nation of ignorant, primitive people ripe for manipulation. It was one of the most culturally and scientifically advanced societies on Earth. It had the highest literacy rate in the world. Its universities were the finest in the world. Its scientists, philosophers, musicians, and writers were among the greatest of any era.